Former Defence Deputy Secretary Peter Jennings has warned we could face a military exchange with China, and he's given examples of the shooting down of an aircraft or the sinking of a ship. He said this could happen later this year or early next year. He says the risk of this is actually high. He uses the term high and says China's already engaging in highly dangerous militaristic pushing and probing around its neighbours. Have a quick listen at what he had to say.
China is engaging in highly dangerous militaristic sort of pushing and probing around all its neighbours. The risk of that leading to a military exchange, a shooting of an aircraft out of the sky or a sinking of a ship, I think is actually high, and probably higher than people realise. So it's a dangerous time, and I think it's got a number of governments around the world seriously alarmed at what might take place in the second half of this year and moving into 2021.
He argues that one of the reasons for this is that China is seeking to take strategic advantage of the pandemic. Joining me now to discuss this and more is John Lee, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute in Washington and at the US Study Centre. He's also a former advisor to the coalition government. Welcome to the program, John.
Good evening, Sharri. Thanks for having me again.
Now, is the 2020 Strategic Defence Update and commitment to spend $270 billion on defence over the next decade, is this all because we're so worried about China?
Well, in short, yes, it is. Look, there are a lot of problems in the region, a lot of things we're worried about, but it's really only China that would cause such a change or such an upgrade of our defence capabilities. And it's not just spending more money, it's what we're looking to spend the money on. So you're talking about hypersonic missiles, long-range missiles, unmanned vehicles. Now, if you had to acquire new capabilities to counter the People's Liberation Army, those would be it. So basically, yes, it is about China.
Is Peter Jennings right, do you think, when he says we could face some sort of uprising or, military event with China in the second half of this year or next year? Do you agree with this assessment?
I don't think anyone can put a time frame on it, but I would certainly agree with Peter that the risk has gone up significantly, and it's something that we need to think quite carefully about because it's a realistic possibility. There are two issues here. The first is that Xi Jinping, the president of China, he seems to be in the mindset now of escalation. He doesn't seem to have any other option. The second issue is that he hasn't allowed himself any off-ramps. He doesn't seem to be able to de-escalate for domestic political reasons, I would assume. So those sorts of factors will just further increase the risk of some kind of conflict.
Look, you say he's now in a mindset of escalation, and it's quite interesting because the view's traditionally been that China craves international standing and recognition. So how do you then make sense of this current conduct where the Chinese government has become more hostile and aggressive, insulting nations and threatening countries with economic retaliation?
China has never really confronted this pushback by multiple nations at the same time before. And I think like an individual person, a regime is really the product of your habits and your normal behaviour. Now, domestically, when the Communist Party faces disagreement, what does it do? It intimidates and it coerces. This is precisely what it's doing with nations. And you add to that the Communist Party has this very hierarchical view of itself in the world, that China is exceptional, and that no nation has the same rights or privileges as a Communist Party-led China. You take all those factors together and you see a very counterproductive and I would have to say a very ugly face of Communist China.
Yeah. Do you think that are there any rivals internally to Xi Jinping who argue that this aggressive approach of increasing the escalation is not the approach that China should be adopting on the international stage?
There are, but many of them are subsequently silenced or put in jail. There's this saying that Xi Jinping is riding a tiger, and if, or perhaps when he falls off, that tiger will devour him. I think there are people waiting in the wings for Xi Jinping to fail, and if he fails, then I think he's in trouble.
You've written that the old guard would be aghast at the wrecking ball approach that he's taken. Is there any evidence of any kind of movement by his rivals? Are there any factions that are becoming more active?
There always used to be lots of factions in the Chinese Communist Party, and there still are, but we have to remember that in the last 8 years or so, since Xi has been in power, he has put 1.5 million Communist Party members in jail, and he has put around 400 seriously senior Communist Party members in jail. Now, this buys him some time, it buys him breathing space, but there are a lot of powerful people in China waiting for him to fail. And you can guarantee that those factions still exist. His rivals are still out there, and new rivals are emerging. But in the current environment, until he fails, it is too much of a personal risk to them to really speak out against him.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've seen evidence that this virus, that the coronavirus, is more unusual than the flu, that it can have lasting impacts on organs, and there's more evidence coming out about that the whole time. It's definitely no ordinary virus. What's the latest on whether COVID-19 may have been genetically altered in a Wuhan laboratory to make it more infectious to humans?
There are some scientists who have come out saying that the virus looks a lot more synthetic than it does natural. I'm not a scientist, so I can't judge. There are reports that when officials in Beijing first found out about a SARS strain, which is now COVID-19, one of the first things they did was to dispatch military health officials to the Wuhan lab. Now, once again, we don't know the significance of that, and that's something that we need to find out. The one thing I am concerned about is, as you know, we had the World Health Organization agreeing to send an investigative team to Wuhan. The one thing that concerns me is that the terms of reference of the investigation is that they investigate the source of what they call the zoonotic beginnings of the virus, that is, from what animal it came from. Now, I think that is presupposing investigation. They should investigate the source of the virus, period, whether that's an animal or whether it's a lab, and then go from there. So the fear that I have is that the hard work that we put in to begin this investigation may be constrained by a very limited terms of reference.